Good afternoon, everyone. I'll be presenting on behalf of Medicine 4. I've titled my topic Brewing in the Bones, and my consultants in charge are Dr. Dawn Kurvilla and Dr. O.C. Abraham. My patient is Mrs. M, a 52-year-old housewife from Thoothukudi. She presented with swelling behind her right ear since January 2020. She then developed swelling over the left middle finger since March 2020, and then swelling over the right knee since August 2020, and then swelling over the right lower abdomen since September 2020. These were all insidious in onset, and they gradually progressed in size, and she started to recruit one swelling after the other, which gradually progressed over the year. Initially, she had an incision and drainage done at a local clinic for the swelling behind the right ear, and it continued to discharge pus-like fluid, which was initially trickling out and then increased to pus-like fluids that were discharged in copious amounts. All these swellings were painless, and she was unable to extend her right knee fully. She had occasional fever noted in the month of October. However, this was not a very troublesome symptom for the patient. It was low grade, not associated with chills or rigors, and it did not recur after the month of October. She was found to have significant loss of weight of 25 kgs in the last 1 year, associated with loss of appetite. There was no preceding skin infections elsewhere, no digital ulcers or blackish discoloration of extremities, no cough, chest pain, or breathing difficulty. There was no change in her bowel habits or abdominal pain. She had history of having consumed unpasteurized milk from a local milk vendor. In past history, she did not have any history of contact with tuberculosis, and she didn't have TB in the past. Neither did any family member have TB. She was not a diabetic or a hypertensive. On examination, she was alert, oriented to time, place, and person. She was a very thinly built, frail-looking individual. She was emaciated. There was marked pallor, and she also had platynychia and leukonychia. There was no icterus or lymphadenopathy that was felt. There was no pedal edema, and she had very thin skin. Her vital parameters were stable, and she was severely malnourished with a BMI of 15.8 kilogram per meter square. She was also found to have discharging sinuses. So these are the pictures. There was a discharging sinus noted in the left middle finger proximal phalanx. This dried slough seen, but she intermittently had white, pus-like whitish milky fluid. On the left side, there is a small slit. On the right side, you can see the picture where she had a swelling over the scalp that was lying above the parietal bone behind the ear. There was a slit-like sinus which was again oozing the same whitish fluid, and there is some dried crusted secretions which are seen. This swelling was not independently mobile. It was fixed to the underlying bone. She also had a swelling over the right knee with a fixed flexion deformity. The swelling had a mild increase in warmth, but there was no tenderness, and the consistency was boggy, and patellar tap was negative. On systemic examination, cardiovascular and respiratory examinations were normal. CNS examination did not show any nuchal rigidity or spine tenderness. On abdominal examination, her abdomen was soft with no increased warmth or tenderness. There was a soft fluctuant swelling that was noted over the right iliac fossa. It roughly measured 8 to 10 centimeters. However, the margins were not well defined, and the swelling was extending posteriorly over her gluteal region. There was no change in the size or the prominence of the swelling on making her elevate her head or turning her body from one to side, and the skin above the swelling could be picked up. The liver and spleen were not palpable, and there was no shifting dullness. So this patient had come with multiple chronic soft tissue abscesses and osteomyelitis with discharging sinuses, which were involving the right parietal skull bone, the left proximal phalanx of the middle finger, and the right lateral abdominal wall. And she also had a right knee swelling, which was characterized by a synovitis. She had severe protein energy malnutrition, and she had clinical signs to suggest probable iron deficiency anemia. The etiological differentials that we considered were a disseminated skeletal TB, brucellosis, or an osteoarticular melioidosis, or a subacute bacterial endocarditis. Her initial investigations showed a microcytic hypochromic anemia with a transferrin saturation of 31%, and her corrected reticulocyte count was 0.7%. Her total counts were normal, 8,100 with neutrophils of 69% and lymphocytes of 21%. The platelet count of 5,90,000. Her creatinine was normal. She was not a diabetic. HbA1c is 5.7 and her BBVS was negative. The liver functions only showed a hypoalbuminemia, the albumin of 2.4 with a total protein of 6.7, and she had an elevated alkaline phosphatase. 3 blood cultures did not reveal any growth, and the cardiac echo was normal. We had imaged her brain to see the extent of her right parietal bone collection. She had an extradural collection, also another collection in the subgaleal plane, which had tracked through the parietal bone, and she also had some features of perilesional edema in the adjacent brain parenchyma, but there was no evidence to suggest cerebritis on the MRI. A CT abdomen with contrast was done, which showed a collection along the iliac crest, which tracked into the iliac muscle and extended posteriorly into the gluteus muscle as well. She also had multiple small walled-off collections in the anterior part of the parietal peritoneum and in the subhepatic region and below the dome of the diaphragm as well. We had screened her bedside and done a needle and an aspiration of the fluid over the right lateral side of the abdominal wall collection, and that revealed this white milky pus-like fluid which came out. We had drained about 700 ml of this fluid, and this came positive for expert for TB, and MGIT culture also grew Mycobacterium tuberculosis, and the sensitivity is awaited. On the expert TB PCR, it came as rifampicin susceptible. The final diagnosis was a multifocal chronic tuberculous abscesses and osteomyelitis with discharging sinuses involving the right parietal skull bone, the left proximal phalanx of the middle finger, and the right iliac crest. She also had a right knee synovitis and a right iliacus pyomyositis. She also had severe protein energy malnutrition and anemia of chronic disease. So I would like to briefly discuss about tuberculous osteomyelitis and this unique presentation of it being multifocal. Skeletal TB accounts for 10 to 30% of extrapulmonary TB cases, and there's a higher proportion in highly endemic areas. So this is in order of descending. This is in order of descending incidence of how common the disease is. The Pott's disease is the most common, and followed by TB arthritis, extraspinal TB osteomyelitis, and the least common is a multifocal TB osteomyelitis. The most common presentation is a single site osteomyelitis. However, occasionally there can be contiguous spread to the surrounding soft tissues and adjacent joints. Multifocal osteomyelitis is a rare entity. There is one case series and 2 case reports which describe this. And in one of the case reports, the patient presented similarly to our patient, where she had knee tenosynovitis along with a pyomyositis. Frequently, the clinical presentation may be cold abscesses with swelling and modest erythema or pain without much local warmth. Because these patients present in a multifocal manner, there can be erroneously diagnosed as a metastatic malignancy also. The pathogenesis is mainly because the TB bacilli in the blood seeds to the bone and the synovium. In younger patients, this occurs following primary pulmonary tuberculosis. In older individuals, it happens because of late reactivation. Reactivation occurs when the host's immune defenses fail, and the histopathology can either be a caseous exudative type versus a granular type. We think of this when there is a chronic or subacute course and there's presence of cold abscesses, and diagnosis is usually made with a needle aspiration and biopsy, and expert is 79% sensitive and expert ultra is 91% sensitive for TB. So the treatment remains first line ATT for 9 to 12 months, again based on the MGIT culture and sensitivity patterns. Surgical intervention is only required when the patient has spinal disease with advanced neurological deficits or worsening deficits on appropriate therapy, or if a kyphosis of more than 40 degrees is seen, or if there's a chest wall cold abscess. In other cases, medical therapy is sufficient for resolution. So our patient was initiated on first line ATT for 9 to 12 months. Her MGIT susceptibility report is still awaited. Her protein energy malnutrition was addressed, and she was started on a high protein diet after corresponding to the dietary department. She's currently under follow-up with Thoothukudi Government Hospital, and she's taking first-line ATT from there. She has now gained weight of 2 kilos, and her discharging sinuses have now resolved. Another notable point in her is that she has had this problem for about a year prior to presentation to CMC, and she was evaluated extensively in Coimbatore. And there was a delay in diagnosis because of this rare presentation, and they had thought of other causes like a malignancy. So the take-home points in this patient is that multifocal chronic osteomyelitis is a rare presentation of skeletal TB. It occurs in the elderly due to late reactivation of the bacilli, and medical therapy, that is anti-tubercular therapy based on sensitivity, remains the mainstay of treatment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Catherine, for that very clinical presentation and the approach to the patient. Dawn, you want to say something?
uh, want to appreciate Kathy for highlighting the fact that osteoarticular TB is a rare inflammatory joint disease with an indolent and insidious presentation, and early detection is crucial to aid in proper treatment to avoid characteristically progressive destruction and permanent joint deformity that we can develop if it is left untreated. Our treatment team was extremely appalled and sad that coming from a very well-to-do South Tamil Nadu rich background, the diagnosis was actually missed, and she was not adequately diagnosed or treated. So I mean, we think it's fortunate that we were able to arrive at the right diagnosis and start her on the appropriate therapy, and she has responded to it. Yeah, I'd like to ask OC sir to make some comments as well.
And no further comments. Very good presentation, Kathy. Very thorough, in fact. And thanks for the additional comments, Don.
Thank you, sir. I guess cold abscesses are becoming rare, and I think the clinical clue was that there is no inflammation, inflammatory changes. But I think that also had diverted the diagnosis from a cold abscess to a malignancy. That's why I think your patient's diagnosis got missed. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Dawn, and thank you, sir. We'll move on to the
Thank you,
next
ma'am.
case by Medicine 1, not a stroke.